Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of In With the Old. We're the video podcast focused on dispelling myths, building appreciation for God's Word, helping you rediscover the Old Testament for the life of faith. Well, we've made it through season 3 and the Counterpoint series where Dr. Tim and I debated various ideas. I had a lot of fun. I hope it was very helpful to all of you. Tonight, Dr. Tim is not able to join us, but fear not, I've brought back my favorite guest so far, and I think a fan favorite as well, Dr. Christian Wilder from Grand Canyon Theological Seminary. Christian, welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Doing good. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. Christian, you are, and I've said this offline, I've said this in person to you, but you're just one of those people that I absolutely love just talking God's Word with, because it's always fun, it's always exciting, and it strikes that right balance of exciting my intellectual curiosity, but also my passion for the Word. And you always bring a good amount of humor, so it's always a good time. So glad to have you back.
And I would also add to that, there's always a level of respect. And
yes,
too often, too many conversations, that's not true anymore. So I agree. I enjoy our conversations because of that.
Well, thanks. And yeah, so listeners, we just went through season 3 where Tim and I were disagreeing, but one of the things that I appreciate about that was that those debates were done with respect. And Christian's another one of those guys that I love to talk about God's Word and have respectful conversations, even disagreements with.
Absolutely.
And our encouragement is we really hope you find those people in your life because, yeah, I'll just say this week on the internet and some comments and feedback have not been that at all times. And that's fine. We could disagree, but at least here we're going to try to keep it respectful and focused on the topics at hand. Anyway, so tonight, as we're getting ready for Thanksgiving, we have a double portion of fun ready for you. We're going to start by talking about the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and then kick it over a little bit to apocalyptic literature. So, Christian, let's get started. Last time you were here, we were talking about the Second Temple period, and that was really helpful talking about just what that period is, some of the big books and ideas. We gave our listeners the idea of reversing a circumcision, which is still a Google search for the brave. And if you want nightmares, hopefully we're not going anywhere near that tonight. Instead, we're going to touch on the Old Testament connection point to those topics.
I have to ask, did you Google it after?
I'm going to plead the fifth because we are live and being recorded, sir.
I apologize. But, I have a cold, and so
that's all right. No worries.
Anyway,
so tonight, though, we're bringing it back to the Old Testament touch point that leads us to the Second Temple, which is Ezra and Nehemiah, kind of our last historical books aside from Esther, if we take that as a historical book. Let's just set the scene. Yeah, Christian's laughing because that's a minefield we're not going into. Let's start by talking about where we are in history and the scope of the Old Testament. So Ezra and Nehemiah, we start with the people of God, just the kingdom of Judah, right, in captivity. Walk us in a little bit. What's going on in their world and when in time are we as these books start?
Okay, so 540, 539, 538 BCE is when we're talking. Okay. And you have to realize that just a few years before this, Babylon is still the power in the entire region. Okay. And then this little entity arises to the southeast, and his name is Cyrus. And all of a sudden, he starts taking battle after battle, and he moves north, and he's winning more battles, and he flows west, and he takes the entire Asian plain. He goes over, he takes the Ionic League, wipes them out, and it's amazing. I mean, the only time you see something move faster than this is Alexander the Great, when he comes later on. So they come back around, they come south and come into Babylon, and there is debate about Cyrus's entry into Babylon. The way he promotes it is that he came in as a liberator. and
Mm-hmm.
they were welcoming him. They were thankful that he came in and liberated them from their king, because their king moved from the cult of the city and started worshiping, I believe it was the sun god, or I'm sorry, the moon god, I believe. I would have to go back and check that out. And so Cyrus positioned himself as a liberator. Um, and all of history says that he came in and they welcomed him with open arms. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's because Cyrus probably had a fantastic PR guy. What most likely happened was he infiltrated people in, and they got the ball rolling, either with kind of leading the crowd, or maybe got some of the religious leaders or group something, and kind of pushed it forward. Nevertheless, Babylon falls, Persia takes over. That's 539 BCE, and then
Mm-hmm.
Cyrus puts out what we know as the Cyrus cylinder, but it is this declaration sending all of the nations that Babylon brought into Babylon Central, sending them back home. And we step into that in Ezra chapter 1. It's not the same as what's on the Cyrus cylinder, but the concept is the same. So
Right.
that's a real generalized picture. Egypt is still a power down south. Um, the the Greek states, they're still city states. They're not united yet. They won't unite until Alexander the Great in they unite 340, something like that, 350, 340.
It's around 200 years after Cyrus, so we still
Yeah,
have plenty of
yeah.
time before that becomes
And,
an issue
and
for
they
them.
actually unite under Alexander's father. So,
Right.
but yeah, so that's kind of what's going on in the big picture.
Okay. And I like how you brought up Cyrus seems to be this great liberator, but maybe had a good PR guy. The late comedian Norm Macdonald always had a funny line. And he's like, "Isn't it funny how everyone in history is always the good guys winning and always the really nice people that get ahead?"
Yeah.
Right. Just pointing out that we do need to be critical readers, and I don't mean skeptical readers, but we need to be aware, right? People are people, and human nature is human nature. Those that win are going to try to do what they can to make themselves look good, right? And the Cyrus Cylinder, which you referred to, it's one of our important documents written in Akkadian, and it starts off by portraying the old Babylonian king Nabonidus, I believe, correct?
Yeah.
As a sinful and wicked king, and right, Cyrus is coming in as this liberator.
Yep.
And so, although the wording as Ezra starts is slightly different, it's the same idea. We're going to put you all, these captive people that Babylon took, back in your lands. From a empire standpoint, that's always struck me as a very smart idea. When Babylon and before then the Assyrians, right, would come in and they would either disperse, destroy, or relocate people. You destroy your tax base, you destroy the utility of the land, and that's not a good way to maintain an empire. The Persians, correct me if I'm wrong, the Persians have of those three, the Assyrian, because they kind of go back to back to back, the Assyrians into the Babylonians into the Persians. The Persians have the longest and most powerful run until they come up against the Peloponnesian League and then ultimately against Rome. But I think, right, they have the most lasting of those three empires, right?
They do, but they lost their empire to Alexander the Great. So, but that
right,
was
it's their successor state that fights Rome.
Yeah, but one thing that should be noted is that you're familiar with Dan Block, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in his book, Gods of the Nations.
Mm-hmm.
So what he says in Gods of the Nations is that you have like a triangle where you have the God, the land, and the persons. And when those three things are together, you have a people. And so by removing the people from the land, like Babylonians did and the Assyrians did, you break that. And so you're actually breaking the back of the people. They no longer have a meta narrative that connects them to their God and to their history. So in some ways that makes sense. But Cyrus, by sending them back to their lands, is reconnecting that and reconnecting them to their God, which allows him to claim himself as liberator, which is
Sure.
brilliant.
Yeah, especially from a modern strategic standpoint, you're gonna go, wow, that's a genius move, because you're instantly going to get goodwill, even as you then begin assimilating them back, right, through kind of cultural, not appropriation, but alteration, to try to make sure that they still feel connected to your power base. Um, it's interesting, if you don't mind, let's segue here just real quickly, because that idea of land, God, and people, or land, God, and persons is what makes a people, I think is important. We haven't really talked about that on the podcast, but would you say that that is something that would be operative in the Israelite mindset? And that's why
Oh,
the
absolutely.
Exodus is devastating for them.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, you even have the buildup as they're preparing to be exiled. You
Mm-hmm.
see God starting to provide um, condemnations of other nations. And the question is, why is that? Before it was, well, yeah, he's condemning these nations because Israel is going to go in and take them. Now Israel's not going to take them, and there's still a condemnation. Why? Because it is God teaching the Israelites that he's not just the God of the land of Israel.
Mm,
And it's funny because before the exile, it's the God of Israel. After the
right.
exile, he's referred to mainly as like the God of the heavens,
Mm-hmm.
because there's this broadening, this understanding that he is truly the God of the world. Now, a lot of evangelicals, and I'll probably get both of us in trouble here, but a lot of evangelicals like to believe that the entire Old Testament is monotheistic. I would disagree.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the entire Old Testament is henotheistic. They believe there were many gods out there, but there was only one God they were to worship, and that was Yahweh. And
Yeah.
I would say that it is in the captivity that we see the true final move from henotheism to monotheism. Now, again, recognize there's a lot of good evangelicals that would disagree with me on that, but I do think that's what we see in um, the captivity. That's one of the theological shifts we see.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'll get in trouble right alongside you, Christian. I tend to agree as well. I've published an article, not in an official blog, but on GCU's Theology Commons, arguing that the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," is not about monotheism. It's about monolatry. It's about worship of one God,
Mm-hmm.
irrespective
Absolutely.
of the existence of other gods. And in part, listeners, if you're like, wait, what are they saying? In part, we need to recognize there's no Israelite word for a spiritual being that is not a divine being. Well, even that's maybe problematic. But realize when they talk about angels or the spiritual realm, they use the term Elohim, gods.
Yep.
And so what you have to then parse out is, how did they view the spiritual realm? Did they view that there's only a single creator God? I think that's undeniable. But you have a spiritual realm that's very operative in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to that breaking of the three elements, I think we see that in Hosea, don't we? When you start saying they are lo rami, they are not my people.
Yep.
You see this idea of a break. And then that's going to bring us nicely into Ezra and Nehemiah, because we are going to return to the land. And Christian, as you just said, that doesn't necessarily mean we return to that nice triumvirate of God and the land and persons. We now become a people again, because there becomes some problems. So as we start in the Ezra story, we get the decree, return to your land. And we have a couple different migrations back. But what are some of the difficulties that the people face once they are back in the land?
Well, let's get into more trouble. There is
Yes.
there's something else that's kind of just under the currents that we need to talk about, and that's this: when Persia goes into a new nation, okay, they do this. They go to the head or the top cultic figures. And they say, here's what we will do. We will restore you to your previous position. Okay. If you give me the top position I can hold within your cult. And so,
and by cult, we mean in a religious system in the ancient world.
religious,
We use cult
right,
in Old Testament studies. Go ahead.
right. And so, for instance, he comes into Babylon, and he becomes king in the festival. He actually goes, shakes the hand of the god, which makes him king and puts him in the highest position in the cult. When they go into Egypt, excuse me, one of the Egyptian generals, who's also a priest, he turns on Egypt, if you will, and he actually goes to Cambyses the second, who is the son of Cyrus the Great, because it's Cambyses who's leading this. And basically, what happens is he says, "I will make you pharaoh," and Cambyses then restores his temple and one or two temples that are for him, and none of the other ones. And of course, being get made a pharaoh puts him at the highest cultic place in their land. Now,
Right.
that being said, you have in Ezra 1, go back, go to your land, restore the temple, restore the city, do all these things. But how many Christians look up Isaiah 45:1, where Isaiah declares God saying Cyrus the Great is his Mashiach, his anointed one, his Messiah. Now, before too many things happen there, understand that Messiah simply means one who's anointed with oil. So every high priest, every legitimate king was a Mashiach. They were an anointed one. But here it started to take on a little bit more connotation. That here's an anointed one, anointed into the office of king. Now, in the end, that's going to be fulfilled in Jesus Christ. But we can't skip the idea that you have a non-Davidic, non-Hebraic man being called God's anointed king. And it's the same pattern you see with Egypt, same pattern you see with Babylon. Now, why is that? Is it just the fact that we're just seeing political mechanisms and or machinations, and that the Bible is just a document like anything else? No, the Bible is recording what happened in history, and this is how it came about. But it doesn't mean God's hand wasn't on it.
Right. Do you think, especially that I like that you brought in the Isaiah reference, because that is an interesting element. We've talked in the past on this podcast of the idea of a Messiah being a Davidic king, right? So Solomon is evaluated as, is he possibly the Davidic heir? Is he the Messiah that we're looking for in that sense? And then that kind of goes through the Davidic kings. But that's part of the shock, right? Is that Cyrus does not fit the pattern, and yet he is the one that is called that by Isaiah, or rather by God through Isaiah to his people. Right. So that would have been a shock to the system, and maybe is going to get at part of the problem that we deal with in Ezra and Nehemiah, or part of the problem in theology that we're wrestling with, right, as we get to the Old Testament. How do the people of Israel understand their God and his control and work in the world? And there's maybe some tension there. But even listeners, if you read along in Ezra, right at the beginning of Ezra, Cyrus makes a very bold claim, right? The God of all heavens has given me, or the God of heaven has given me authority. There's some, how do you want to put it, Christian? There's some subtle insinuation of a legitimate authority within their system. Because we've already talked about that's going to be a preferred term for Yahweh going into this
Yeah,
time
I would
period?
say that it is very much, he is the king that God has given us. And nowhere in
Mm-hmm.
the Old Testament or the First Testament is Persia spoken of negatively. Nowhere. Babylon,
Hmm.
horrific. If you
Oh,
accept,
horrible. Yeah.
yeah, if you accept the prophecies of the Greek Empire, horrific in some ways. You know,
Sure.
Assyria,
Yeah.
Egypt. There's nothing good in Egypt. You know, Egypt is like the modern day New Jersey. Just nothing good. And I I said
Hi,
that
New Jersey. How
purposely.
are you doing?
I said that purposely because my wife is upstairs. She's probably hearing this, and she is from New Jersey. So, anyways, if you see me kind of looking up, it's
Oh
because
boy.
I'm paying attention, make sure my life isn't, you know. But anyways,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, Egypt is horrible, but there's nothing bad said about Persia.
So if I was putting on a skeptic's hat, I would say, does that indicate then that the Old Testament was written under compulsion? Or rather, because a lot of theories on book formation is that it happens in this Persian period. So is this
Well,
lack of critique of Persia evidence that the writers of the Old Testament, editors, redactors, whatever term you prefer, were not free to criticize Persia? Or, as I think you were leaning toward, is there a theological maybe reason as we look at these empires that Persia is spared some of the critiques that the traditional enemies like Babylon and Egypt receive from the biblical writers?
well, this actually gets into an even deeper conversation of to what level does Persia control the daily life of its people, its other nations, the nations that it has within its authority. And there is a great deal of debate on that. I would
Hmm.
argue that they didn't pay a lot of attention to local control. And it's because of the way that they integrated the the king as the highest part of the cult. So you can't really do any religious things without supporting your king.
Sure.
And so he allows them to do that. He kind of backs off and takes his hands away. The governors are Jewish.
Hmm.
And so it's not until you get to, um, if you would, maybe regional or empire level, levels that you actually see the true Persian strength and focus on that. Um, by the way, another
Okay.
element of that where I was talking about, going into an empire and saying, "Hey, I'll be, give me the highest position," blah blah blah. Another part of that was that there had to be a strategic person or place or a strategic reason for it, and
Mm, okay.
they were planning on taking Egypt. And if you look at a map, unless you want to load up on boats, there's only one way to get to Egypt,
Yep. It's
and you
through
better
Israel.
have that little strait between the sea and the mountains in control.
Hmm.
And you do that by sending the people back there and getting back in touch with their God to control that land. But anyways, I'm backtracking now.
No, that's it's good though,
Mhm.
right? We've seen multiple battles in Israel
Yeah,
during both the Assyrian period and the Babylonian period, because this has always
yeah,
been a goal of the Mesopotamian empires is to conquer Egypt.
yeah.
Israel listeners, right, historically always had this kind of untenable and unenviable position of sitting between two ancient and historic superpowers, Egypt and
Yeah.
its various dynasties, and then whatever basically came out of Sumer, the
Yeah,
Sumerians, the Assyrians, or the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, etc.,
yeah.
etc. Um, so coming back then to Ezra, so
Oh,
we've got
oh,
Cyrus. Oh, sorry, no, let's
yeah.
stay there. Go for it.
No. So you asked me about critical thinking dealing with Persia. The
Hmm.
other issue going on here is you have this nation who's come in and said, we're going to liberate you. We're going to send you home. We're going to give you money. We're going to give you everything you need to go back and to fix it up. Now go do it. I would think that just the natural response to that is to write in a way that they are uplifted and the people who caused this problem that they defeated are the enemy. So take everything else out, just human nature. That is the natural response. Because they are in some ways, they are the savior, and then add to that the fact that Persia does have a lot of influence, and they do restore. They do seem to be God's hand and bring back some of the things of Israel, or I should say of Judah or Judea. And also, let me state, at this point in time, because we have words like Hebrew and Israelite and Jew and whatever else. Before the Babylonian captivity, you have the northern and southern kingdom. They are the sons of Abraham. They are Hebrews. Okay. After the captivity, they're Jews. And so historically, when you're talking about this group of people, after captivity, we call them Jews, short from Judah. And before that, it's the southern kingdom, Judeans, whatever else. So
that's an important aside, listeners, by the way, because when you talk about a Jewish person coming into modernity, we are talking about descendants of Judah. The Assyrians did their job well with the 10 northern tribes, those Israelite tribes. They are dispersed. I'm going to say in totality, like we cannot trace anyone back to that. The best we get are a group of, shall we say, half-bloods that we often call the Samaritans, that they are half northern Israelite. But yeah, so Jew stands for Judah. Christians getting in trouble from his wife. That's fantastic.
No, I'm
no.
I'm very tempted.
I thought you were.
I'm very tempted to grab a book up there and say, yeah, but what about this, which is the Mormon Bible? But we won't go there. And I am just kidding.
Not touching that one.
No. For those who are unaware, they believe that the lost 10 tribes somehow came to North America. And that's, I was referencing that, but I am just joking.
Hello, Internet. How are you doing? But no, so you bring up a good point. Welcome for Dr. Christian's second and last appearance on In With You. No, so this is an interesting point, right? So Persia does seem to, both from Isaiah and how they're operative here, they're acting as God's agent, restoring Israel to the land. And so maybe from that perspective, it makes sense that they are given a more positive treatment. They aren't the ones that carried off Israel into captivity. They're the ones that punished those who carried them off into captivity. So that does kind of make sense. As we then look at the land, the people come back in and we start rebuilding a few things, right? We rebuild the temple, we rebuild the wall. One of my favorite memes I've shared with you, Christian, is Nehemiah for governor. We're going to build a wall and make Persia pay for it. It cracks me up. No further political comments meant by that, aside from I find it hilarious. But so we get back in the land, and that is what we start doing. We build the temple. And this is the start of why we call it the Second Temple period, right? Because the Solomonic temple is that first temple. Yep. Now we have this new temple.
Which is actually...
But
I don't... Do I want to even throw this out there? Oh, why not? This is actually the third temple. So,
all right. Well, and then you have to add in Herod's ascent, right? So what qualifies as a new starting of a temple versus an expansion of what already existed?
Let me kind of share what I'm saying.
Yeah, go for it.
Way down in Egypt, down in the Nile on Elephantine Island, out of the blue, this Jewish temple shows up. Okay, and it's there. Some people think that maybe it came about from the time that Jeremiah and those went down there. Others say no, it might have been some other time. We don't know, but just this temple shows up. And in this period of time in Ezra and Nehemiah, they're aware of the temple because we have letters that we found in the temple on Elephantine from the temple in Jerusalem back and forth. And they're cordial letters. Hey, brother, how you doing? Please let us know when the official time for the start of Passover is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have another letter that comes back and forth when the priests of Num destroyed the temple, possibly because they sacrificed bulls in the Jewish temple, and
Yep.
and so they write a letter trying to get the governor to support their rebuilding of the temple, which doesn't happen, which is interesting.
Hmm.
You could be seeing the fight between the two sides within Ezra and Nehemiah there. Um,
Yep.
and then later on, as I shared last time I was here, you have a temple in Leontopolis that shows up with Ananias 4. You also have a
Hmm.
temple that gets built um, in Samaria. So you have all these
Yep.
Jewish temples popping up. It's a fascinating thing. But when we say Second Temple period, we mean the actual temple that was built on Mount Zion. So
Right, on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
yes,
Um, yeah, and so by the way, the study of those other temples, especially the Egyptian one, is fascinating because just as a breadcrumb out there, right? There's the connection of what happened to the Ark. And there
yeah.
are some theories that then push it down into Egypt and then into Ethiopia through that route. Which that's a rabbit that's a rabbit trail. We'll try to stay with just Ezra Nehemiah for now. But whether it's Ezra and Nehemiah's temple or these other ones, they lack something, right? We are never told that the glory of the Lord inhabits the temple like we do with Solomon's temple. Um,
Yep.
what does that do theologically? As we're going through the book, we rebuild the temple. Of course, we see that the people weep, those that were alive and knew the original one. This is a shadow of its former self. And then we don't hear about the glory of God coming on the temple. What does that do for us both as readers, but then what would have done that to them as the people in that time?
Well, I think for them, they see themselves as renewing the covenant.
Hmm.
And if you read through Joshua, especially through Joshua, there are several covenant renewals that happen. And you
Right.
don't
And
see the
like
Spirit
Gilgal is a big
falling.
one,
Mhm.
etc. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then if you go deeper into Second Temple theology, for instance, um, Jubilees sets up all of the covenants
Mhm.
as renewals of the covenant of Noah.
Right.
So the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, all of those are actually renewal covenants or renewals of the Noahic covenant. So for them, I think they would just see it as a covenant renewal. And so we're going to rebuild the temple. We're going to renew the covenant, and we're God's people again. And here we go. The problem is there was this underlying belief that they hadn't yet really returned from Babylon, that they
Hmm.
weren't fully restored. And you see this in different places. So you have, you mentioned earlier about the forced divorces. Okay. Well, part of what's going on
Hmm.
is the Galah, the ones who were in captivity and returned, okay, Hagalah, they thought they were the ones who were purified by going through captivity. And they should not let themselves be tainted by those who are still tainted by sin, those who did not go into captivity. And so you have this split between the what's called the Amharetz, the people of the land, which a lot of people used
Right.
to identify with just the Samaritans or whoever else. But that's not all true. The people who were taken off into captivity, they were the ones that could actually contribute to society,
Right.
contribute to the intellectual element, could contribute by skills to society. The ones who just had, could just farm land or do labor, they were left behind. Blankenship, Blenkinsop writes a book called was it Judaism: The First Phase, where he talks about the myth of the empty land. That
Mm,
there's a myth that the land was empty when they were gone, and they just came back and filled it. They didn't. They came back, and there were already Jews there, but they were
right.
not purified. And so when you start to see that debate about who gets to help build the temple, it's not just the Samaritans up there; it's also the Amharites,
Right.
the
The people left
marriages.
behind.
Yeah, it's not just the Samaritans; it's intermarriage with Amharites. And so this thing of, you know, one, are we purified enough? Well,
Mm,
that did purify some, but there were many who said we were not fully outside of, you know, we haven't fully been restored yet, and so they're looking for a future restoration. So, but there's just a ton of stuff that falls into this, and
right. And human nature. It's interesting this coming back. So you've got, right, if I'm understanding you correctly, these two classes of Jewish people: those that have
yeah,
gone through the Exodus and now returned, those that remained, and those that went through the exile. Sorry, not the Exodus. View like, hey, we went through the crucible, quite literally. History repeats itself, by the way, when we move into the Christian Roman period, and you have persecutions where some Christians stay in it, go through it, and others have retreated outside the empire and then come back. And you
yeah,
also have these kind of times of tension of, wait, what are we? Who is the pure people who have made it through?
yeah,
So how do they begin resolving the tension? I think I had actually mentioned the mass divorce before we went live, but one of the more
yeah,
interesting elements of Ezra is you do have a mass public divorce, which is the only time this happens in the Bible. And so walk us through, why is this commanded, and was it a good thing? Was it correct?
Well, first we have to clarify. Uh, you talk about Ezra and Nehemiah being historical books, and that's true in the sense of I think there are things that happen in history, but they are
Mm-hmm.
not included in what we would call the former prophets, which
Correct.
is,
Yes.
you know, First, Second Kings, uh, First, Second Samuel, First, Second Kings. These are actually called the writings, and the
Mm-hmm.
reason I point that out is because the former prophets, what we call the historical books, have a prophetic voice in them that says this was right, this was wrong. There is no prophetic voice in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. There's no prophetic voice. Excuse me. There's no prophetic voice in the writings, and let me explain as I say that, because
Mm-hmm.
Daniel is part of the writings.
Yep.
There's no narrative voice that says, yes, this was a right action, that was a wrong action, like you get
Mm-hmm.
with the kings. You know, this king did so and so, but he left the idols and said, you know, left the high places, and
He
so
committed all the evil, Jeroboam, son of,
yeah,
yeah, Nebat.
didn't
Yeah,
do like his father David, and so excuse me, that cold popping up again.
that's
When
all
you
right.
come back to Ezra and Nehemiah and you see what they're doing, that prophetic voice is silent. There is no voice there saying this was right or this was
Mm-hmm.
wrong. So we have to make sure that we do not look at the Bible and say just because it's in here, it means God approved it. Because if you think that, then go read the last couple of chapters of Judges.
Mm-hmm.
God
Yeah.
did not approve that. I'll guarantee you. Um, so what I think happens here is you have these people who are trying to, they've just came back into the promised land. And all they know is if we do what our forefathers did, we will be taken back into captivity. And we cannot
Mm-hmm.
have that happen. And so what we must do is we must obey the letter of the law. Now, that sounds horrible to us because we've been brought up to, you know, ooh, the Pharisees, we don't like them. Okay. But you have to put yourself in their perspective.
Right.
If I step outside of this, I can end up back in captivity. If my neighbor steps outside of this, I can end up back in captivity. And none of us want this. a good modern day example of this might be, um, okay, I'll just go for it. If if I'm a Palestinian and I have seven, I'm in a neighborhood, and if we do this, this, that, or this, Israel will come take us. Well,
Hmm.
I don't want that, so I'm not going to do those things. Now that's minor, and please don't read any politics into that. Just helps us get our head around it.
It's helpful.
For
You're
them,
caring not only about your own obedience to the law, but it's your neighbors because you know their
right,
obedience affects you as well.
exactly, and vice versa. Your obedience affects them, and so,
Mm-hmm.
and all they have is the law. Because remember, at
Mm.
this point, Habakkuk, Job, as you've written on,
Yeah.
several other books are all asking what's going on with God. Why is he not acting the way he used to act? And
Right.
so they come to the conclusion of, well, we don't know how God's acting, but we know that if we obey the law, then perhaps God will do what he used to do. And so
Mm.
you get this tight obedience to the law. And that's where you get into the divorces. And again,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing there saying that it was right. Matter of
There's
fact,
no seal of approval saying like
no
"Thus
seal
saith
of
the
approval.
Lord," and this was
Matter of fact,
good.
I would argue in the final editing of the Old Testament coming together, there's a reason why, in my opinion, why um, um, Tamar and Zipporah and
Mm-hmm.
um, Ruth and all of these Gentile women are shown to be superior to Jael, are shown to be
Mm-hmm.
superior to these Hebrew hero males in their faithfulness to Yahweh. And I think that they're there to kind of say that no, well, what we're seeing in Ezra and Nehemiah is not correct.
Yeah, this sort of blood purity, the sort of like rigid adherence to like you have to be an Israelite, um, does not fit the rest of the narrative of Scripture, right?
Right.
David is not purely Jewish. I mean, that's what the
No.
Book of Ruth is trying to point out.
Yep.
The irony, and we see
It's Moabite.
this even in other places, right? The irony of those that should know better don't, and those that don't know better do. And
Yep.
God, I think, uses that to. I think of the New Testament, right? He opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble.
Yeah. Absolutely.
God's got a good sense of humor, which I love
Yep.
because I like these kind of inversions of what you would expect. Um, yeah, no, it's
Now,
a good point.
your listeners might be saying, "Well, okay, then why is this even in here? And are we left with
Mm.
just these multiple voices going all different directions?" And I thought the Bible pointed to Jesus, and I would argue it does. That this very specifically is left this way with these multiple voices asking all of these questions because Jesus is the answer to every one of these questions. Are we still in captivity? Yes, we are. And I'm going to lead you out of captivity. And so Matthew comes along and rewrites the story of Israel in the life of Jesus. And that's why in Matthew, uh, just like with Moses, so when Jesus is born, children are killed. Then Jesus comes out of Egypt, just as Moses comes out of Egypt. Moses goes through the Dead Sea with Israel. Jesus goes through his baptism with Israel. Moses comes out of his baptism, goes into the desert for 40 years. Jesus goes in the desert for 40 days. In the desert, Israel is tempted. In the desert, Jesus is tempted. Moses or the Israelites fail in the desert. Jesus doesn't fail because he can defeat the enemy that
Yeah.
Israel could not defeat. Fast forward to the end, Babylon is Jesus's cross. And he goes into Babylon on Friday. Sunday, he resurrects out of Babylon, defeats the enemy that Israel could not defeat. And therefore, he's reconstituting Israel around himself. And so
Yeah.
I would argue that leaving the questions open and these multivariate voices in the Old Testament is purposeful because Jesus is going to answer every one of those questions. So Job, how, who is this God? What's going on here? And God's saying, you have no idea. Even if I try to explain it to you, you wouldn't know. Well, who would understand God coming and dying on a cross?
Right. Yeah.
And I could go on, but I'm Baptist. I might get in the pulpit if I keep going. So,
But no, it's good because we call this in Matthew, right, the recapitulation of the Old Testament, where Matthew does frame the story of Jesus as doing what Israel didn't do, doing what Israel couldn't do.
yep.
I love, even though, and this is very intentional, listeners, the temptation in the wilderness. Jesus quotes Deuteronomy every time. I don't think that's an accident that that's the book he goes to. He's like, look, I can go to the book from that time. And Christian, would you agree with me? I like to say that there are breadcrumbs left. So we have these multivariant voices, but we have some breadcrumbs, some interesting points. So I'm thinking of two verses. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. You have Malachi 3 and 3:7. And if you're just reading through your Bible, it maybe doesn't jump out. Return to me that I might return to you. And you might go, okay, I've heard God say to his people, return to me. But then you realize Malachi is a post-exilic prophet. He's writing to the people of Ezra and Nehemiah who are back in the land, who have rebuilt the temple, who, according to their culture, right? Oh, we've reset that triangle. And God says, return to me. You aren't back. There's something else that has changed. The people have left Babylon, but Babylon hasn't left the people, so to speak. And then the other passage that comes to mind is Luke 2. So Jesus as this kind of fulfillment, the hope, the thing that did not return. I think we see it in Luke 2 because Simeon looks at Jesus when he's being presented at the temple. And Simeon goes, you can now let your servant depart in peace, for my eyes have seen the glory. The thing that did not return to the second temple has now returned to the temple, no longer in a building, but in a person, right? And so you get this kind of beautiful fulfillment of some of these themes we've been talking about. Anyway, I just wanted to throw those two out at you and just see kind of what thoughts bubble service, Malachi 3 and then Luke 2.
Well, and as you were saying that, excuse me, as you were saying that, you actually kind of messed with my head because Malachi, I mean, I know there's an Aleph in there, and so we don't usually make this connection, but some say that it's a messenger, from messenger, but so you have a messenger of God saying, "What, return to me, and I will return to you," and I'm wondering on the etymology even of that word, if it's connected to Melech or Melech. No, it looks like it's more Malay fullness. Something for you and I to dig into offline.
Yeah, we've done that a couple times with like, okay, we need to dig into that more. All right, we'll set that aside for now.
And just as an aside, that's actually how a lot of academic scholarly work happens, is we just have conversations like this. We go, wait a second, what about, and then we get into it. I just delivered a paper at ATS, the Evangelical Theological Society National Meeting, and that paper came out of just a conversation that Brian, myself, and one other person was having outside the College of Theology. So it's not that we were sitting in our little caves and figuring, we just discuss. But I apologize. You asked.
And so much. No. That's, we're peeling back the curtain. You need people around you because even scholars don't. The stereotype, right, is you just lock yourself in a library. Yep. But even then, you're dialoguing with those who have written those books, and we do it by dialoguing together. But anyway, the idea of the post-exile prophets still saying to the people, "You need to return." I could imagine an Israelite or a Jewish person going, we're in the land. We've rebuilt the temple. What more do
Yep.
you want? And especially if Ezra and Nehemiah are trying to lock down on we're going to be rigidly obedient to the law. I think this highlights that we're missing a point here. Return to me, that I might return to you.
Absolutely. And there might be some people out there that says, okay, but because there is no command to rebuild the temple either.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they just do it.
That's an interesting point, isn't it?
There might be somebody out there that says, well, wait a second, what about the passage that says, well, you live in homes, what was it, homes of cedar, and but look at my house, whatever. But notice he's not saying go rebuild it. He's saying, he's using a comparison. This is what you have on earth that represents me from a previous covenant. And yet look how you haven't paid attention to it. But look at your own homes. He's not necessarily saying go fix it. He's just saying look at the comparison. So yeah, I would absolutely argue that there is a longing, there is a openness that something is not right, and they're looking for it to be right, and they're turning to the law. And I would agree with you that there are these breadcrumbs from the prophets, from the latter prophets, that are pointing out you need to return, you need to come back, you need to return. And it's funny because John the Baptist kind of picks up on that exact same message.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Repent, be baptized, and the whole thing. We load our modern idea of baptism into it, but Second Temple period, it's the mikvah, and it's just a ceremonial washing or cleansing to show that you have repented in preparation for the coming of whatever. Turns out with John the Baptist is the coming of the Messiah, but in the Qumran community, it would be a washing for going into the ceremonies or whatever.
So we have this. I think this is really helpful, Christian, for our listeners to kind of see. We see traces of what is going to come to be in the New Testament time in Ezra and Nehemiah. We start to see this kind of idea of rigid adherence to the law that already has been messed with a little bit in the Old Testament. Because I think of Jonah. Yep. One of the lessons of Jonah is a worry about you can. And I'm not taking any credit for this, right? But you can see in Jonah the story of the prodigal son and the older son. And this idea of that you can avoid God both by being irreligious and by being religious if you miss the point. And we have here in Ezra and Nehemiah, I agree with you, I think kind of a missing the point of what was the law supposed to do for them. We're right at the end of the Old Testament timeline, so to speak, right? As you hit Ezra and Nehemiah. And something that starts happening, I'm going to throw this at you live and see what you think of it. Something that starts happening as you leave the Old Testament time period, as it were, and move to the Second Temple, is you see a cessation of the writing prophets. So the former, as Christian said, in the Jewish ordering of the Old Testament, you have the former prophets, then the latter prophets. As they go away, you start having a new genre of writing starting to show up, and we call this apocalyptic writing. Daniel is maybe an example of it, at least half an example of it. Now, Christian, we'll define apocalypse as a genre here in a moment. Or maybe we should start there, and then I'll throw my question at something I think maybe is happening with apocalypse. But apocalypse in the Bible is going to be the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. What is apocalypse as a genre?
As a genre, the apocalyptic genre usually produces one of two kinds of writings. Either one, and I think I shared this with your audience last time I was here, but one, you have heavenly journeys, catabases, and abases, that is journeys either into the depths or into the heavens or out into the universe. And angels will follow and they will explain different things. And then in the other type of writing, it is a writing where a group of people go through a very dark time. Like everything is about to be destroyed, and then somehow they make it through, and God comes back, and everything is wonderful, and there's a bright future afterwards. Interestingly, Revelation combines those two legs of that genre, and it's
Yeah.
one of the few that I know of that actually strongly combine both of them.
It blends both elements of both. We have
Yep.
transportation into heaven for scenes, and then also talking about the future. How to read the prophets for all their worth. No, that's not the name of the book. I shouldn't do this live. I'll look up the name of the book in a second. Peter Gentry, and I'll look up Dr. Gentry, the name of your book, in a moment. I apologize. But when he talks about defining apocalypse as a genre, he says it's describing one event in terms of another, because that gives the event meaning. So that apocalypse does try to get at least in our biblical examples, events, but instill them with meaning. So the example he says is, let's say you come up to some people on the side of a street, and there's two people, and you ask one person what happens. They said, well, I just saw a car wreck. And then the second person says, I just saw my world end. They've both described the same event, but one has done so abstractly because they care more about the importance of the event, what it means, what it signifies, rather than the details of the event. Is that a fair characterization of apocalypse as kind of like the meaning behind it, or not in your mind?
Well, who am I to disagree with Dr. Gentry, first off? But I think there's more to it than that. It's a style of writing.
Okay.
But it comes about during a very broken period where
Yes.
meta narratives are broken. You don't know what's coming. Let's jump forward a couple thousand years. Okay. Think about the 1950s in France or the 1960s in America, 1940s and 50s in Germany, the late 40s or 50s. Same thing in Britain. If you've read back then, or if you're old enough to remember, there was a lot of horrible things happening. The rebuild of the facades of the buildings were falling down from World War II. From World War II, they rebuilt it, and those facades were coming down, so everything was kind of just crumbling around them. It felt like society was kind of crumbling around them. A lot of the things that they thought that their hopes for the future were crumbling, especially in the United States in the 1960s. The meta narrative of Americana was starting to be destroyed because the black voice was getting stronger and saying, well, wait a second, you're saying this, but look at our experience, and rightly so.
It doesn't match, yeah.
And so you had this uproar where there was nothing to really set your feet on anymore, and everything was broken. That understanding is exactly what was going on in the Second Temple period. And it's funny because there are a lot of things that are talked about as postmodern, and postmodernism actually gets connected with apocalyptic for that very reason. That's why in my dissertation, actually, I took a modified postmodern historiography approach, because I was dealing with apocalyptic literature in a historical time period that represented the exact same thing as when postmodernism came out in the mid to late 20th century. And so
it's an attempt to try to find meta narrative and meaning when the old system has crumbled.
Yeah, and
is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's a way of, that's part of it, and another part of it is, again, how do we tell a story and not get our heads cut off by the people that are above us? And so we talk in this grandiose language, and we talk about it as if it's something that was prophesied from 1,000, 2,000 years ago. so that somebody can't say, well, you said this last Friday. And so, yeah, there's a ton of stuff that comes into there, and I'm not comfortable boiling it down to just one little, it's this or it's that, outside of what I shared in the very beginning, because that's more of what
Sure.
form does it take.
Right, that's form rather than function here.
Yeah. In,
So
in,
that maybe is a part of apocalypse, but we shouldn't maybe
yeah.
collapse all of apocalypse into that idea.
Yeah. And when you say function, then you have to ask the question, what is 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 the apocalyptic genre replacing something, or is it in addition to something?
Mm.
And this again,
So
this is what my dissertation was in, which was, there are people who are saying that it comes out of the prophetic movement, especially if you go with the 400 years of silence. There are people who say that it comes out of
right,
the wisdom movement. People who say that it comes out of the priestly movement, which are the prophetic, the priestly, and the wisdom movement are three of the four pillars of ancient Hebrew society. Fourth one being the royal pillar, so the kings,
right.
so the royal movement. Then there are people who say, well, no, it's Babylonian in origin, it's Greek in origin, it's Egyptian in origin, it's Sumerian in origin, it's whatever else. Excuse me. My argument, my dissertation was, when we look at everything that they use for authority in their writing, so when they're borrowing authority to say you have to believe this, I argue that if they move too far from what they borrow, then they're not borrowing that authority from their original source, because they move too far away from it. It's no longer authoritative. And so when you
Mm-hmm.
compare all of these things, what you find is that the origins of apocalyptic literature is not Babylonian and any kind of Babylonian literature or Egyptian literature or anything else. It's not in the prophetic or the wisdom movement. It's located purely in the milieu of the Second Temple period, of its history, of everything that's going on there. And so I would say that the apocalyptic genre is it's a bubbling up of all that is um, Jewish in the Second Temple period. It's
Okay,
a
so like
creation
an
of a new
expression of
genre
their
because of that.
okay. So an expression of kind of that moment in culture, that
Yes,
period of unmooredness, I guess I could say.
yes.
Um, Excellent. No, thank you for that. I knew this was your background, so I kind of wanted. I'm like, all right, I got to ask him some questions. The book, by the way, was "How to Read and Understand the Biblical Prophets" by Peter Gentry. "How to Read the Biblical Prophets for All Their Worth" is another good book by Christopher Wright, but confused that, so apologies. Both are good books. Go read them. Circling back though, because this is what I'm interested about apocalypse. So, of course, as evangelicals, we're going to say, all right, what belongs in the Bible are these the First Testament and the Second Testament. We're going to go with those lists, okay? But I'm going to try to keep us employed, Christian, and not get us in too much trouble here. But God speaks, and that doesn't necessarily mean he speaks only in and through Scripture. As I was introduced to the apocalyptic literature in the Second Temple, one of the things I've seen is that there seems to be an inverse relation, although not a direct connection, as you said, I think is a good point, but an inverse relation between the prophetic voice and the apocalyptic voice. As one diminishes, the other does seem to rise.
It
Here's my
does.
question, and I'm not saying it's connected as in like it comes out of it, but in Jesus's ministry, he starts by talking plainly and openly, and as he moves forward, he then switches to parables. Let he who has ears let him hear. I've heard it argue, or it's been presented to me, that the apocalypse is almost the genre example of that idea of it is now the truth being spoken about in a more veiled form for those who actually want to hear the truth, as an attempt to get at it. Is that compatible or fair to what you were saying, or is that tied to more prophetic source theories of
This
apocalyptic
is
genre?
my reaction is a first blush reaction, because in
Okay.
all honesty, that's the first time I've heard that. And my reaction is not fair, because my first reaction is to push away from that, because it rings as a Gnostic idea to me. But I know that
That there's like hidden meaning in the
yeah,
text or
but
something that we have to
I know
find.
that's not fair to those who produced that idea because that's probably not where they're going. So I would have to read
Mhm.
more into. I'd have to read that more to see where they're coming from it, or where they're coming from. There
Sure.
are times when like I said, those who have an ear, let them hear. You go back to Isaiah, hear but don't you know listen, or however it is.
Yeah,
Um,
speak but do not
Speak
hear,
but do not hear. Yeah,
the
and
the
so
people won't listen to you.
there is that concept of those who are deaf will become more deaf.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think also that Jesus intended for all of that to be laid open immediately or almost immediately after his resurrection. So we see
Yeah.
a lot of that coming out, within the first, the first sermon, the first few sermons afterwards, they're putting all of it together. Whereas in the apocalyptic genre, it's not put together and it's not apocalyptic genre um, often is talking about events that just happened as if they happened many years or as if they happened in the future.
Right.
Um, and so
And
and
we don't
so
have anyone, unlike Jesus's parables, where he then goes to his disciples and says, "This is the meaning." We don't
yeah,
have that companion of apocalypse
right.
either.
Now, as I
So,
say that, you do have the War Scrolls in Qumran, where it is a prophetic. Here's how the end war is going to happen. But that's more of there's a dark period of time, dark, and then something great is going to happen just after that. But there's nothing really hidden in that. It is a very
sure.
blatant. These, this many people of this tribe is going to march here, and people of this tribe is going to march here, and they're going to attack like this, and so it's very,
Mm.
very blatant in that.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. So I agree with, like, so my first reaction when I heard that, I'm like, that seems so neat and nice that I'm concerned it's artificial.
Yeah.
But I don't trust my own intuition and background on that. So I appreciate the kind of insight you have there. Um, so our readers are probably familiar with the two biblical examples of the genre, vis-a-vis half of Daniel, right? Because half of Daniel's
Yep.
narrative, and then John's apocalypse. What are some of the other, for a Second Temple scholar, what are some of the other big and important apocalyptic works that are produced in this period?
Well, you actually have Ezekiel, little part of
Yeah.
Ezekiel, Joel, parts of Joel, um, but then of course the major one, is the book of First Enoch,
Yep.
and it's actually it's like four, five, six different books put together, um, and it repeats kind of the same cycle, the same discussions many times. Um, you have Second Enoch that kind of goes with that. Then you have uh, Slavonic or Third Enoch that follows with that. Um, Fourth Ezra you can throw in there, although Fourth Ezra, Fourth Ezra, Fourth Ezra. Um, I've also read a paper that said it was basically a peyote trip. So you never know.
Yeah.
And if you read it, you can understand why, because they are actually in, I think in Iran, someplace in Iran, and they find a plant and they eat it, and then they have visions. Um,
Checks out.
yeah,
Snoop
um,
Dogg approved.
yeah, yeah. But those are the main ones. You have
Okay.
what, Tes- Testament of Levi and Moses, I think. Um,
Yeah. The Assumption of Moses.
yeah, and then if you're going with Heavenly Journeys, um, oh, I can't remember the name of it, but when Adam and Eve get taken up and through their journey and uh, everything else
Yes.
of the heavens, and then I actually mentioned in my dissertation, I argue that um, the Book of Jubilees is there's a chapter that is apocalyptic in it, and it's in that
Hmm.
chapter that it portrays the Book of Jubilees being written. So I argue
Hmm.
that the Book of Jubilees is actually has ties to apocalyptic literature as well. But if you want to say, if you want to really read apocalyptic literature, I want to go to Jubilees. I would go to First
It'd
Enoch.
be
First Enoch
Enoch.
is kind of
Yeah.
the creme de la creme of apocalyptic literature in the Second Temple period.
Yeah, and there are translations available online. If you just
Absolutely.
search for First Enoch, you can find it fairly easily. How important is understanding a book like First Enoch for your average Christian that says, I don't want to do the Left Behind, an American flying the Antichrist airplane interpretation of Revelation. I want to try to dig in and go, only 90s kids, I guess, will get the Left Behind joke. Anyway, um, I want to dig in and understand, right, what did John actually mean in his book? What did Daniel actually mean in his book? How important is something like a First Enoch or in any of the books you mentioned? How important are those to understand what the biblical writers are doing?
It depends on what you're arriving at. Um, we have to back up to talk about hermeneutics and approaches to reading Revelation in general.
Sure. Yeah.
Because if you're reading Revelation to try to pinpoint, um, you know, when is this going to happen, and is Russia's move into the Ukraine this part? You know, if you're trying to play pin the tail on the Antichrist, this isn't going to help. There's actually a book called Pin the Tail on the Antichrist and other very non-Christian games Christians like to play, and it was a wonderful
Oh,
book.
I
It came
like
out in
that.
the mid 1990s. If you haven't read it, read it. It's wonderful. But um,
It is going on my list.
but so if you're looking at it for that sense, reading the Second Temple apocalyptic literature is not going to help. But if you want to find out
Yeah.
what is the author doing with this kind of stuff, what genre is he working in, and why is he working in this genre? What does this genre do? Then it will help. Go pick it up, read
Mm.
it. There are some commentaries, some good commentaries that you can pick up with them and read. Unfortunately, they are very expensive. So, um, but you can pick it up, you can read it. There are several books that will help you kind of make sense of it. But also remember that those who wrote the book of Revelation were guided by the Holy Spirit. Those who
Mm.
wrote First Enoch, at least in my understanding, were not. Now, there's one or two Eastern churches, I believe, that does accept First Enoch as canon, but most of us don't.
But it's not going to be the mainline Orthodox church,
Right,
even. It's going to be
right.
subsets of those. Yeah. Okay. No,
So,
that's helpful because right, I could see your listener going like, "Oh, did I just like expand my reading list? Am I allowed to read any of these books? I don't know. They
yeah,
might kick me out of my church."
yeah,
So that's helpful.
absolutely read them, but read them in the same way that you would pick up and read a fiction book written by an author that also writes your favorite history. So this way you can understand how
Yeah,
he writes. Then but when you're reading history versus reading his fiction book, you know that you're reading two different things.
that's really good. I really like that. Well, fantastic. Christian, I've already taken you kind of long. Do you have time for two quick questions
Sure,
before
absolutely.
we sign off for tonight? Awesome. So we've got two questions, both from Jacob. First, circling back a little bit, about 40 minutes ago, we were talking about polytheism, henotheism, which is the worship of one God while accepting that other gods exist in the Old Testament. The question says, so how do you read through, like, especially Samuel, there seems to be an acknowledgement of other Elohim.
Yep.
Um, where does this start to get clarified? Like, can we point to some specific points to go, no, here's where Israel clearly starts planting flags of going, there's only one God, in the sense that you and I would use it in a modern sense?
I would say you start to get that in the prophets. Now, the prophets, of course, expand a lot, are a long time, but um, minor prophets,
Well,
especially.
yes.
Oh, crud.
Who declares the end from the beginning, right? That seems to be God's own criteria for what is a God.
All of a sudden, my brain just went blank. Minor prophet that goes through like 9 different nations right around that area and condemns them all and leaves Edom for the last.
Oh, is that Amos? Right? Circling in
Is it Amos?
to the last one? Well, Amos is circling. I don't know if it's the one that leaves Edom, though, to the last.
But
I'm also having a brain fart.
in there, you see that the expansion of Yahweh not just being a God of Israel, but bigger. You even see it somewhat with the end of First and Second Kings, I think, or the end of Second Kings, I think, where God's now controlling Babylon.
Yes. Right, and you've got the psalm that's saying of Egypt, right? This one was born here. There is a sort of expansive sense. Jacob, to your point, I think there's a couple of interesting things. The 10 Commandments, you shall have no other gods before me, as a meaningless commandment if there's not something else that could fit in that category, at least conceptually, right? So I think right there you have this kind of little like, there's some other things out there, but we've talked in several podcast episodes, Christian, about the creation story, and I see Genesis 1. Tim does not, but I see Genesis 1 as a disenfranchisement of other spiritual beings. To go, look, whether they're out there or not, you're not made in their image. You're made in my image. They are created, as are you, and so there's no allegiance, whatever category used to talk about them, that's fine. It's just me as the creator God.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, that whole thing when you get it's the PL, no, the HIFPL, where the spirit hovers over the water. Okay.
Yep.
And the idea there, the water is the deep to home. There's a lot of connection there to chaos gods. The concept of a chaos monster, a chaos god, and the idea that the spirit is hovering over it is the idea that God is in control of chaos, which is antithetical to almost all other creation stories.
Every other creation
chaos
story
is in control, and chaos is creating. Well, not creating the world, but chaos is in war with other gods. And
chaos conf. We actually used that term a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, and they're able to beat it back. Here, there is no chaos. God is in control. His spirit hovers over the deep.
Yeah. No, so Jacob, to your point, the idea is always there. Part of the issue we wrestle with is a terminology gap between how we talk of God and angelic realm is a distinction that does not exist until you get later into the text. So that's part of the issue. And then part of it is cultural as well, and their understanding of what the spiritual realm is and how it engages.
Do we know Jacob's last name?
Yes, but because it's recorded online, I try to dox someone.
The only reason I asked that is because I want to make sure it's not one of our colleagues that are messing with us.
No. This is a longtime listener, friend of the podcast, Jacob.
Great.
So,
wonderful.
no, I would have pointed out. Yeah, great question. And the second one that comes in, just for a book suggestion, because this is good. Temples for Dummies. Christian, that's a book we need to write. But no, if we're going to point someone like, what's a quick way to go like, what do we mean when we say first temple, second temple? Is there a go-to dictionary, Bible dictionary that you like, or a reference work that would be helpful for the common reader out there?
I shared this before. I think the go-to dictionary for Second Temple Judaism is the Urban's Dictionary of Early Judaism, but it's about this thick and it's very expensive. A classic. This is Persian period history and historiography by Williamson. That's probably not as good, but I don't know if you can see that, but it's an introduction to Second Temple Judaism by Graebe, Grabbe, Lester L. Graebe. It's a thin book. It's a very good book that's just kind of an introduction to what's going on in the time. Graebe, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe he is either a atheist or agnostic Jew, or Jewish atheist or Jewish agnostic. I could be wrong, but I think that's his background. And I'd share that with you to share that if you're picking these up and reading it, don't expect just an evangelical point of view. These are points of views from all over the place.
Sure, and there's value in that if you're trying to get a broader understanding.
Yeah. I may have shared this with you before as well, but it's Vanderkam's Introduction to Early Judaism. This is the second edition. He has a third edition out now, but it's pretty good. If you want to dig deeper, a little bit deeper, and I referenced this before, this is Judaism, the First Phase by Blenkinsop. It's Joseph Blenkinsop, Blenkinsop. And if you like history, there's a nice thick book, From Cyrus to Alexander by Pierre Briant. This is a beautiful, massive book. It comes out of the French Leger Doré method of history, which is the long duration. Great book. Pick it up and read it if you really like history. One thing I want to leave your readers off with. Oops, I missed that. One thing that I want to leave your readers with, or your listeners with, as you start to study Second Temple Judaism, you might get into Vaki, Wellhausen, some of those. They're unfortunately a lot of anti-Semitism came out of their writings because these were turn of the last century German writers, German theologians, and they saw in the development of Judaism, the development of the law. They said that the law came out and it killed this living thing, which was the ancient Hebrew religion, the prophets, and they used that to I shouldn't say they use it to solidify or to allow their anti-Semitism. I think that's going too far, but I do think that you can say that you can see a trajectory started long before them, but they were part of it. So please be careful when you read through any of the older German writings on this stuff. Yes, there was a big break. Yes, I do think that there was a grabbing onto the law, but it was because it was a life vest for them. So ever since World War II, in the New Testament, there's been, or New Testament studies, there's been a big concern about making sure that we are historically accurate. That no, it's not the Jews that killed Jesus. It was every one of us who killed him through our sins, and the Romans who put him on the cross. Yes, the Jews led him there. We are all guilty. Old Testament studies, let's be honest with the way it came about. Yes, the Jews and in the early Second Temple did grab onto the law, but it was as a life vest. It wasn't to choke out the life of the earlier
It's a
prophets.
very human reaction that I think makes sense when you put it in context. Yes. And I've said on the podcast before, I look at the Pharisees of Jesus's day and I go, he fights with them the most because they're the closest in so many ways to
Yep.
getting it. They're
I've actually
almost there.
argued that Jesus was a Pharisee.
They seem to think he's one. They call him rabbi.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a good warning and just a good reminder, because that can shock you if you're not like prepared for it. And you start reading and you go, oh my goodness, they are saying some things that I really find objectionable or aren't expecting. So thank you for that warning out there. Listeners, those are really good references if you're looking to go deep. If I'll take the shallower route. If you're just looking for like a quick introduction, a Bible dictionary will do you well. Lexham put out one in 2016 that's pretty good. Lauren McCune wrote the Second Temple article. It's fairly well put together if you could get your hands on it. There are also some really good books about ancient Near Eastern history and the region. There's lots of material out there, and we'd highly encourage you, go and spend your time. Context helps us understand the word of God, because God speaks through time and speaks through culture and speaks through context. And so the more we can understand that, I think the better we are going to be as readers of the Bible, and hopefully therefore doers and not just hearers only. Christian, thank you so much for coming on and letting me keep you a long time. Brother, I just love talking with you. And
absolutely, I enjoy it.
We're probably going to stay on this call for a while after we're done recording, but thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I enjoy this.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Next week, Dr. Tim will be back with us, and we have another guest interview. We're going to be bringing in Dr. Russ Meek to talk about his work in the book of Ecclesiastes and Genesis. It's going to be a really great interview, so we'd invite you to join us then. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hope you have a fun time with your family. As always, stay cool and stay old. Have a great night, everyone, and take care.